Greetings to you, brothers and sisters in Christ. I am Pastor Timothy Ang. Welcome to this second talk in our series of 3 videos on the Methodist Social Principles, focusing on the sphere of the family. Our speaker for this series is Rev Nathanael Goh. In the previous talk, our speaker introduced the sphere of the family with a special focus on marriage. If you have not seen the video, you may access it on the CAC Singapore YouTube channel. In this second talk, Rev Nathanael will focus on parent-child relationships, including issues surrounding abortion and assisted reproduction. Let us now explore these important matters in this video.
In our first exploration of the sphere of the family, we focused on marriage. In this video, we turn our attention to 3 critical touchstones of family life: parent-child relationships, as well as the issue of abortion and assisted reproduction. The human person cannot be fully understood as a completely self-sufficient organism. Built into our bodies are capacities for sexual and reproductive activity. If all of our natural abilities were fully exercised, then the human would walk, talk, eat, drink, breathe, sense, and think, but also be a romantic partner and a parent. In other words, the human creature in its fullness is familial by nature. A fundamental part of our body can only be fully utilized in concert with a human of the opposite sex. This orientation towards others undergirds the Christian ethics of family life. For example, Christianity has taught that marriage is the proper context for fulfilling our sexual capacities for companionship. Marriage is an institution established and blessed by God, precisely so that 2 persons can mutually fulfill what one cannot do on their own. But God also calls spouses to broaden their marital love, to include the gift of children that God entrusts to their care. This unfolding love is why the principles language switches between parent-child and family terminology. The unfolding love of marriage creates and sustains the family to be a context of mutual love and belonging between husband and wife, parents and children. And in this way, Christian families prefigure the self-sacrificial love and the unity we now share in Christ. Thus, when the social principles call for efforts to prioritize family time, or for social, economic, and religious support for families, it is doing so out of recognizing that families are supposed to be, according to God's design, open and outward-looking, not selfish and private. This also means that families were never intended to be private enclaves, secluded from other families or broader social settings. Families tend to flourish when they are supported by civil society. Individuals thrive through various cooperative activities and relationships that a family cannot provide independently. Families need the assistance of commercial, educational, healthcare, civic, and cultural organizations to provide and sustain households of mutual and timely belonging for all their members. This also explains why the social principles call for support for single-parent families and children to fulfill the duty of care to their parents. Families change over time. What preoccupies newlyweds differs from what concerns a couple after many years of marriage. Parents should come to interact with their offspring as adults, rather than always simply as infants. Adult children should come to see their parents in reciprocal ways, rather than dependent ways. Indeed, there is a symmetry in which the dependence of young children on their parents is reciprocated later as children care for aging parents. Many families confront less than ideal situations. Divorce, illness, untimely deaths, and countless other challenges plague many families. The recurrence of the need for care from society, the church, and other family members necessitates a lifetime of moral formation. We need to be intentional, perhaps especially through mundane things like housekeeping, preparing meals, running errands, and so on, to cultivate our families into a steadfast place of mutual belonging that adapts to changing realities with time. Our exploration of what the social principles say about marriage and family would be incomplete if we did not consider filiation, which is the begetting of children. Perhaps the essential statement the principles make in this regard is that we affirm that every child is a gift and not a right to be demanded from God. Even when the principles refer, for example, to planned parenthood that can be sought or deferred, the underlying theological conviction is that children are gifts that God entrusts to married couples. Procreation is not the only purpose for marriage, and marriage does not lack any essential goodness, even if it is a childless one. Were that to be the case, the church would proscribe childless marriages, such as marriages between couples beyond childbearing years. The church does not do this because we believe that children are divine gifts and that parenthood is a calling. The fundamental emphasis on children as God's gifts illuminates many of the principles of the family. For instance, it speaks to why there is a qualified acceptance of assisted reproductive technologies. Our children are begotten, not made. The Old Testament speaks of God opening and closing the womb. Even with assisted reproduction, successful pregnancies are not guaranteed. Every child is God's entrusted gift to married couples, and couples would do well to remember that, even when they are led to explore assisted reproductive technologies. This also explains why the principles speak of adoption as an equally valid way of establishing a family. Adoptive parents are not second-best substitutes, but follow a calling to parenthood as noble as one originating in biological procreation. Whether through procreative or adoptive means, what is most important is forming the household into a place of mutual and timely belonging and love for all family members. Understanding that infertility is painful, as many examples in the scriptures attest, the principles invites couples to a prayerful examination of when and how to grow a family. This is to combat a misconception of parenthood as an act of the will rather than a calling and a vocation. If parenthood is simply an act of our will rather than a humble acceptance of God's gifts, then any technological, market, or contractual means may be utilized to obtain a child. But this reduces children to outcomes of reproductive projects in which the concept of ownership displaces mutual and timely belonging. In this view, regardless of how she comes to be in a family, a child does not belong with her parents as much as she belongs to them. The social principles therefore denounce surrogacy as a reminder against a reductive and malformed vision of children as possessions. Surrogacy often appears as the option of the desire to use it or other techniques in order to obtain a child of one's own. Yet this is a curious strategy, since for Christians, we have noted that parents do not own their children. Instead, a child is a gift created by God and entrusted to their parents' care. In turn, these parents, whether procreative or adoptive, commend the child back to God through Christian parenting and baptism. We are reminded that Christians find the fellowship, true fellowship, not primarily in flesh and blood, but in water and spirit. Our future is not our children, but Christ, our Redeemer. I conclude this talk with some thoughts on abortion. The principles make clear that abortion is not an accepted form of family planning. In a morbid way, abortion is birth control, controlling whether a human will ever be born. We find abortion morally illicit because every child is a gift from God. Debates over the status of the embryo abound. Is the embryo a human or a potential human? Is the embryo a person or not? But discussions of this kind tend to obscure a simple and profound truth. To be willing to kill what for all one knows is a person is to be ready to kill a person. To be willing to participate in destroying an entity whose status is not disproven beyond doubt is to be willing to kill that entity. Rather than factoring down the moral weight to be given to embryos because of the mere possibility of their personhood, their moral weight should be factored up to be regarded as whole persons. If, for all we know, they are persons, then they should be treated as such. And since we would not countenance the indiscriminate killing of persons, we reserve an unequivocal emphasis against abortion. The principles accept that medical emergencies might sometimes require abortions. Knowing that abortion, whether for medical emergencies or otherwise, is an act with countless ramifications, the principles call for churches to provide and offer support to anyone who has had or is contemplating abortion. Our strong emphasis against abortion comes from Christianity's understanding of the dignity of every human life, which is shared by mother and child. Supporting that dignity includes recommendations on family life and care for those who have opted for abortion for whatever reason. Currently, the principles do not address questions about abortion and women's rights to bodily self-determination. Let me explain why the principles have not approached the topic of abortion from the perspective of human rights, an issue that motivates significant media attention and public discussion. The Church's paradigm is not one of absolute individual rights. Christianity does not understand human life as a perennial zero-sum game of contesting rights. It admits that I am not the center of the universe. What the principles assert about parenting, family life, and procreation is entirely consistent with what the Church understands about the family and the human person. At the start of this talk, I mentioned that no human is an utterly self-sufficient organism. The human creature is a dependent creature by nature. No one of us can survive entirely on our own. This is a truth inscribed into the very design of our bodies. Every person is brought into the world dependent on other humans for survival, and our flourishing depends on cultivating lifelong networks of mutual assistance and unchosen obligations. In a world where increasingly right is might, the social principles are a timely reminder that family life should not be patterned in this way. Instead, may our households be characterized by reciprocal and mutual self-giving, where we submit to one another out of reverence for Christ.
I hope this session has raised your awareness on these important family issues. Once again, there are questions provided for you to discuss in your small groups. You may pause the video to take a look at each question before proceeding to the next one. May you have an enriching and fruitful time of discussion together. May the Lord bless you.